Here in part 2, let me introduce the concept of ecosystem services, a term you might not have heard of before. Ecosystem services can be partitioned into 4 broad categories. There are provisioning services, which are associated with food production, our use of water, our use of wood and fiber, and fuel. There are supporting services, things that the ecosystem does for us: nutrient cycling, soil formation, primary production, and habitat provision. Then there are regulating services: climate regulation, food regulation or flood regulation, and water purification. And lastly, we have cultural services: aesthetic, spiritual, educational, and recreational aspects of nature. These 4 form the 4 aspects of ecosystem services. They can be measured, they can be quantified, they can even be quantified in terms of dollars. So here we have, just a repeat, of these services. And what I'd like to say is that this is a very anthropocenic perspective. In reality, these services, except for cultural, apply to all species. It is estimated that ecosystem services, if we were to truly quantify them, might be about $44 trillion annually, which is twice the global GNP. We depend on ecosystems, and we depend on the biodiversity within ecosystems. Here's a graphic. In the EPA website, we have a list of ecosystem services. I've tried to highlight these on the outside: recreation, culture and aesthetics, food, material, water purification, natural hazards, climate mitigation, fuel. Let's look at a few of these just in a little bit more detail. Climate mitigation. It turns out that 50% of all the fossil fuel emissions that you and I produce every single day, every month of the year, are taken up by plants. So only half of what we burn when we burn fossil fuels ends up going into the atmosphere, because plants subsidize our use of fossil fuels by taking up that elevated CO2 and reducing it into biomass. That is an ecological service. If we didn't have plants to do that, the rate of CO2 rise on our planet would be twice as high as it is today. How about water purification? We depend on intact microbial communities to detoxify materials that are in the water and to purify it, so that as water passes through the soil, these microbes process those materials, resulting in the pure water that you and I drink today. What about recreation, culture, and aesthetics? Our national parks are testimony here. Our national parks and forests serve as areas of recreation, economics, and inspiration. And you should be proud to know that the national park concept is an American idea. Beginning with Yellowstone, we have created a series of national treasures which serve economics, recreation, culture, and aesthetics. What about natural hazards mitigation? Healthy marshes, particularly on the coast, serve to protect the land from storm surges, such as those associated with hurricanes. Without those healthy marshes, the strong storm surges would have much more damage and impact upstream. So what you see here is that biodiversity is central to these sustaining ecosystem services. We've talked about services and how they affect human well-being. But these ecosystem services depend on functioning terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. And in order for these ecosystems to function fully, we need biodiversity. That is, as you lose components of an ecosystem, their capacity to perform certain features is diminished, and therefore the magnitude of an ecosystem service is diminished, and that impacts our well-being. So biodiversity is central to sustaining these ecosystem services. We can make very complex diagrams that directly link ecosystem services with human well-being. Here's an example of one. I won't spend much time on it, but you can look at the handout to see that security, basic material for good life, health, good social relations, and freedom of choice and action are all ecosystem features associated with provisioning, regulating, and cultural aspects of ecosystem services.